My brother's laughter cut through the November air like broken glass. "Still playing soldier, Sarah? Still playing single mom?" His words hung in the cold kitchen while our family watched, silent witnesses to my humiliation. The Veterans Day pin trembled on my uniform jacket as my hands shook with rage I couldn't show. My daughter Emma squeezed my fingers, her small warmth the only thing keeping me from breaking. "Mom served our country," Emma whispered, but David's sneer only widened. "Your mom's a fraud," he spat, and something inside me died right there. Before we begin, if you enjoy true and exciting stories like this one, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Write in the comments what city or country you are watching from. Now, let's get to the beginning of this story. The Hartwell family home had always been pristine. Crystal glasses caught the afternoon light in the dining room where our parents once hosted dinner parties, back when Dad wore his Army uniform with pride and Mom ironed his ribbons with careful hands. The scent of her lavender fabric softener used to linger in his pressed shirts, a memory that still made my chest tight with longing. Now the house belonged to David and his wife Rebecca, all marble countertops and cold perfection. The air itself seemed sanitized, stripped of the warmth that once made this place home. Nothing out of place, not even the pain. Emma and I visited every holiday, a tradition that felt more like punishment with each passing year. She'd run through the vast hallways, her footsteps echoing like scattered thoughts, while I sat stiffly in the living room where the leather furniture creaked under my weight. My worn jeans felt rough against the buttery soft upholstery, a reminder that I didn't belong in Rebecca's world of cashmere and crystal. The photos on the mantel told their story in gilt frames. David's MBA graduation, their European honeymoon in front of the Eiffel Tower, the keys to his third luxury car dangling from Rebecca's manicured fingers. My Army photos had been quietly removed years ago, stored somewhere in the attic with other forgotten things: childhood toys, Dad's medals, Mom's recipe cards. The house smelled of vanilla candles and fresh flowers, expensive scents that masked the underlying coldness. I could still remember when it smelled like Mom's pot roast and Dad's aftershave, when the walls held laughter instead of judgment. "Aunt Sarah's here," Emma would announce, her joy echoing off the high ceilings like a bird trapped in a cathedral. David would hug her with genuine warmth, his face lighting up in a way that reminded me of the brother I'd once known. Then he'd look at me over her head with that familiar mixture of pity and contempt, his success hanging in the air like expensive cologne, choking but undeniable. I always brought Emma's favorite cookies, homemade in our small apartment kitchen where the oven door stuck and the timer had been broken for 2 years. The chocolate chips were real Nestlé, not the store brand I usually bought, my small sacrifice for these visits. Rebecca would accept them with a polite smile, her teeth perfect and white, then place them on a side table where they'd sit untouched until I took them home again. The message was clear: even my mothering wasn't good enough for their world. Even my love came in the wrong packaging. The cracks started showing during Emma's 8th birthday party. David had insisted on hosting it, turning my daughter's simple request for pizza and cake into a catered affair with ponies and a bounce house. I stood at the edge of the celebration, watching my little girl overwhelmed by the extravagance she never asked for. "You should be grateful," Rebecca whispered beside me, her perfectly manicured hand adjusting a balloon arch. "David's giving Emma opportunities you never could." The words stung because they carried truth wrapped in cruelty. I worked 2 jobs to keep our apartment, coming home exhausted to help with homework at a kitchen table that wobbled. Emma never complained, but I saw how she looked at her cousins' bedrooms, each one larger than our entire living space. David's comments became sharper. "Still struggling, sis?" he'd ask when I declined their invitations to expensive restaurants. Maybe it's time to think about Emma's future. Really think about it. The suggestion hung unspoken. Maybe she'd be better off with them. I started noticing how Emma pulled away after these visits, how she'd stare out our apartment window with a sadness that broke my heart. The uniform hanging in my closet felt heavier each day, a reminder of service that apparently meant nothing to the only family I had left. The breaking point came swift and brutal that Veterans Day morning. I'd worn my dress uniform to the memorial service, pride and grief intertwined as I stood with other veterans honoring our fallen. Emma held my hand as taps played across the cemetery, her small fingers tight with understanding beyond her years. We went straight to David's house afterward. I should have changed first, should have hidden the proof of my service, but I was still floating in that sacred space where honor mattered more than money. The moment we walked through their door, I felt the shift in the air. David's eyes locked onto my uniform, his face twisting with something ugly and familiar. Well, look what the cat dragged in. His voice carried the weight of years of resentment, of every perceived slight and imagined grievance between us. Rebecca stood behind him like a shadow, her silence more damning than words. Emma pressed closer to my side, sensing the danger in the room's temperature drop. When David spoke those words, when he called me a fraud in front of my daughter, I felt the last piece of my old self shatter on their pristine marble floor. The silence after David's accusation stretched like a held breath. Emma's hand slipped from mine as she stepped back, confusion and hurt warring on her young face. I stood there in my uniform, medals catching the light, feeling more exposed than if I'd been naked. "Take it back," I said quietly, but David was already turning away, dismissing me with the casual cruelty he'd perfected over the years. "Truth hurts, doesn't it, Sarah? Playing dress-up won't change what you really are." I walked out of that house with Emma running behind me, her questions echoing in the cold air. But something had crystallized in that moment of absolute humiliation. The woman who begged for scraps of respect from her brother's table was gone. In her place stood someone harder, someone with nothing left to lose. 2 days later, Jake Martinez called. My old Army buddy worked for the Tribune now, investigating corruption in military contracts. "Sarah?" His familiar voice was warm with concern. "I heard what happened at the memorial. You okay?" I wasn't okay, but I was ready. Ready to stop hiding, ready to stop apologizing for who I was and what I'd done. When I told Jake about David's words, about the years of humiliation and the systematic erasure of my service, his reporter instincts sharpened. "Tell me about your brother's business," he said quietly. "Tell me everything you know." The investigation began with public records and grew into something larger than either of us expected. David's construction company had won multiple government contracts over the past 5 years, including several specifically set aside for veteran-owned businesses. The paperwork was flawless, except for one small detail. David had never served. Jake found the pattern buried in county records and federal databases, working late into the night while his coffee grew cold and his eyes burned from screen glare. The documents painted a picture of systematic deception that took my breath away. False veteran status claims, fraudulent certifications, stolen valor on an industrial scale. Each revelation hit like a physical blow. While I struggled to make rent with my genuine service record, spending nights awake, calculating whether to pay the electric bill or buy Emma new shoes, David had built an empire on lies about military service he'd never performed. The irony tasted like copper pennies in my mouth, metallic and bitter. My brother, who had mocked my uniform and called me a fraud, who had made me feel small and worthless for years, had been impersonating a veteran for profit while I lived paycheck to paycheck on my actual disability benefits. The back injury from my deployment, the nightmares that still woke me some nights in cold sweats, the pride I'd swallowed to apply for assistance, all real, all earned, while he'd forged documents and stolen honor that belonged to people like me. "How deep does this go?" I asked Jake as we sat in his car outside David's latest construction site, watching workers install a sign declaring another veteran-owned business project. The November air was sharp with the promise of winter, and I could see my breath fogging the window as anger heated my blood. "Deeper than you want to know," Jake said grimly, his journalist's instincts sharp as a blade. "This isn't just your brother. This is a network. He's been coaching other business owners on how to fake military credentials, teaching them which forms to forge, which stories to tell. The betrayal cut deeper than I'd thought possible. It wasn't just the money or the lies. It was the systematic mockery of everything I'd sacrificed, everything I'd lost. The friends who didn't come home, the pieces of myself I'd left in desert sand, the years of struggle and shame. All of it had been twisted into profit margins and quarterly reports. I kept my routine normal while Jake built his case. I went to work, picked up Emma from school, made dinner in our small kitchen. But inside, I was changing. The shame that had weighed me down for years was transforming into something sharper, more focused. David called twice that week, his voice carrying an unfamiliar edge. "Sarah, you okay? You seemed upset the other day." The concern was manufactured, but the nervousness beneath it was real. "I'm fine," I said simply. And for the first time in years, it was true. Emma sensed the shift in our small apartment. "Mommy, you seem different," she said over pancakes that Saturday morning. "Different how, baby?" "Stronger." She considered this carefully, her 8-year-old wisdom cutting straight to the truth. "Like you're not scared anymore." She was right. The fear that had ruled my life, the constant worry about not being enough, not having enough, not deserving enough. It was gone, replaced by something that felt like justice taking root. The story broke on a Tuesday morning. Jake's investigation spread across the Tribune's front page like wildfire, detailing a sophisticated scheme that had defrauded the government of millions in veteran-designated contracts. David's photo stared back at me from newsprint, his confident smile now looking like the mask it had always been. My phone started ringing before I finished reading the article. First reporters, then investigators, then lawyers. Emma watched from the kitchen table as I fielded calls with a calmness that surprised us both. "Mrs. Hartwell, we understand your brother made false claims about military service while you're an actual veteran?" "That's correct. How do you feel about his arrest?" I looked at Emma, my daughter, who would finally understand that her mother's service meant something, that honor wasn't determined by the size of your house or the price of your car. "I feel like justice has been served," I said. The collapse came swiftly. David's assets were frozen pending investigation. The construction company dissolved overnight as contracts were pulled and partners fled. Rebecca filed for divorce within a month, taking their children and disappearing into her family's old money safety net. I watched it all from the quiet sanctuary of our small apartment, feeling no joy in David's fall, but experiencing something deeper: peace. Emma did her homework at our wobbly kitchen table while I read updates on my phone. Outside our window, autumn was turning to winter, the world preparing for renewal. "Will Uncle David go to jail?" Emma asked one evening, her math worksheet forgotten. "Probably," I said honestly. "He did something wrong. And now he has to face the consequences." She nodded with the gravity children reserved for moments when the adult world finally makes sense. "Like when I have to sit in timeout for lying?" "Exactly like that, baby." 6 months later, Emma and I moved to a different apartment. Nothing fancy, but it had better light and a small garden where we planted tomatoes and herbs. The morning sun streamed through windows that actually opened, carrying the scent of possibility instead of defeat. The settlement from David's restitution fund wasn't enormous, but it was enough. Enough for a reliable car that started on the first try, enough for Emma's after-school programs where she learned piano and joined the debate team, enough for us to breathe without counting every dollar twice. I kept my uniform in the closet, but I wore it differently now. The fabric felt lighter somehow, as if the weight of shame had been pressed out of the wool and cotton. To the Veterans Day Memorial, yes, but also to Emma's school career day, where I spoke about service and sacrifice to wide-eyed children. To the neighborhood parade where Emma walked beside me, her hand in mine, her voice strong as she sang the national anthem. The weight of the medals felt different too, Not heavy with shame, but substantial with pride, each ribbon a reminder of who I was and what I'd earned. Emma grew taller and more confident, her laughter returning like spring after a long winter. Her school friends came over for sleepovers, their voices filling our small space with joy that money couldn't buy. They'd sit around our kitchen table, the one that still wobbled but now held memories of birthday cakes and homework sessions and the kind of conversations that mattered. She still asked about her uncle sometimes, but without the confused hurt that once clouded her bright eyes. The nightmares stopped. For the first time since my deployment ended, I slept through the night without jolting awake to phantom sounds of mortar fire. The anxiety that had lived in my chest like a caged bird finally settled, and I could breathe deeply again. On a warm spring evening, as we watered our garden together, Emma looked up at me with dirt on her hands and sunlight in her hair. The tomatoes were already showing small green buds, and the basil filled the air with its sweet, peppery scent. "Mom," she said, her voice clear as church bells, "I'm proud of you." The words hit me like a blessing, washing away years of doubt and self-recrimination like rain on dusty ground. Standing there in our small patch of earth, surrounded by the life we'd built with our own hands and hearts, I finally understood what victory really looked like. It wasn't about punishment or revenge, wasn't about watching someone else fall. It was about truth finding its way to the surface, like the green shoots pushing through the soil at our feet. It was about honor restored and dignity reclaimed. Emma smiled, truly smiled. For the first time in longer than I could remember. Her face held no shadows, no questions about worthiness or belonging. In that golden moment, with the evening light painting everything warm and soft, I knew we were exactly where we belonged. Home wasn't about square footage or marble countertops. Home was this: love without conditions, pride without pretense, and the sweet satisfaction of truth finally set free. And you? What do you think? Did she do the right thing? What would you have done in her place? If this story touched you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us what you thought in the comments. Your support is what helps us continue bringing you exciting stories like this one. Now watch other stories on screen. We'll see you next time, with love and respect.